Hello class, and welcome to week number 4 of CLS 100. This week we're looking at chapter 6 in your textbook, which is called Prioritize. And there are two main topics we'll be looking at this week. The first one is time management, and the second one is stress management. So we'll begin by looking at time management. First of all, let's take a look at some facts about time. One thing that you'll hear people say often is that they don't have enough time, and they act like other people will have more time than they do. But the reality is that time doesn't discriminate. Everyone has the same amount of it. We each have the same number of hours in each day. And if you look at this slide, one of the points that I want to bring up is the third one, which says you can't control time, but you can control how you spend it. And in terms of how we spend it, we tend to devote time to the things that we value. So even though you may think you have less time than someone else, it's not that you have less time, it's just that you don't use your time the same way that they use their time. And when we look at how we use time effectively, ultimately what that comes down to is self-discipline. So if you look at self-discipline essentially is a four-step process. There are four things involved in practicing self-discipline. And the first one is making choices. And what I want to do is I want to talk about each of these four things, or all four of these things, and then sort of break them apart a little bit. So the cycle basically starts with making choices, goes to making changes, third is employing your willpower, and fourth is taking responsibility. And so if you break these apart, the first thing you have to do for self-discipline is you have to make choices around changing negative behaviors. And then obviously the second step would be making those changes. The third step would be sticking to those changes. And the fourth step would be taking responsibility for ensuring that those things happen and for accepting the consequences of your behavior. So managing our time effectively really is a function of being disciplined about the choices you make around your time and around the activities that you choose to engage in. And so if we sort of expand on that, the next thing that we'll look at is this idea of free time. So in your textbook, they talk about free time. So, what is free time? Free time is not something that's created by putting off work or procrastinating or taking time away from things that you're already obligated to do. Instead, what free time is it's time you reward yourself with that's created by planning ahead when you can enjoy after obligations. And I think one of the things that's really important as we look at this chapter is looking at your life and determining whether you have margin in your life and space for free time. Because sometimes we fill our lives with so many things that we don't have time really or space for things like fun or things that kind of bring joy and beauty to our lives. So really, time management is something that's critical to your education, which is why we're talking about it in this class, but it's also something that's really critical to your well-being and to your happiness as a whole, which if you sort of expand on that is why time management, which is what the next slide is about, is ultimately so important. And I think that it's really helpful that in your textbook they have some examples of some different time management types. And so I would encourage each of you to take a look at this chart and try to identify which one of these, if any, is you. So all of these are examples of poor time managers. So first we have the circler, which is the person that keeps doing the same thing over and over again, and it's not working, but they don't change, and of course they end up with the same results. The doodler is the person who focuses too much on the wrong tasks. So they ignore the important details and spend all of their time on small things. The squanderer wastes a bunch of time getting ready to work, but never actually does the work. The beggar is the person that goes in circles for so long and then they get upset when at the last minute time doesn't just stop for them to get things done. The planner is the person who spends all their time planning and then runs out of time to actually do the work. Huns are the people that wait till the last minute, and then once they start to run out of time, expect everyone to just sort of get out of their way. They run over people, they're inconsiderate in trying to get the work done at the last minute. And then the pacifist is the person who feels like there's no chance for success anyways, and so they don't even try. And so if you look at any of those descriptions and can say that that describes you, then you probably have some time management issues. And as we said, time management is extremely important to your happiness, and it's also important to your success in your education. So that's something that you need to be able to rein in and make positive changes around. One of those things that is often difficult for a lot of us when it comes to time management is learning to say no. One of the reasons that so many of us struggle with time management is that we say yes to too many things. And oftentimes we say yes to things that are good things. But even if they're good things doesn't necessarily mean that we have space to do those. And ultimately, if you go back to what we talked about in Chapter 1, you want to focus on the things that are going to help you achieve your goals. If you have opportunities that present themselves that don't help you further those goals, those are probably things that you need to learn to say no to. So if we kind of think about how we say no, there are some tips on this slide that can give you some guidance. So think before you respond. Don't immediately do the knee-jerk reaction where you just say, blurt out, yes, I'll do it. Review your schedule first. See if you even have time and space to be able to engage in the activity. Number 3, learn to be assertive but not rude. You can be firm about putting boundaries around your time without being mean to people. 4th, put yourself and your future first. That's where your goals come in. 5th, negotiate a reasonable deadline. So if you do say yes to something, make sure that you have enough time to actually get it done right. And finally, put a time limit on your yes. So if someone asks you to do something and for whatever reason they put up barriers that keep you from getting that done in a timely fashion, make sure that they know that there's not an infinite amount of time you'll spend on this. Also, in terms of learning to manage your time better, the textbook lays out some simple ways to simplify your life. And I'll go through these relatively quickly, but I do think that they're important. And I think that with each one of these, that there are probably different ones that apply more to your life than others. So some simple things to keep in mind. Identify what matters to you. Can't emphasize this enough. Throughout the book already, we've talked about how we need to figure out what we value, what matters to us, and spend our time and our energy on those things. And your education should be one of those things. Number 2, escape from technology daily. I posted a thread in the discussion board last week about this, but we do tend to get wrapped up in technology, and so give yourself some space to just escape from it. Number 3, learn to delegate. You've got to trust other people. You have to find others who can help you with your tasks. Next, record how you spend your time. That's an assignment that I'm actually going to give you this week to keep track of how you use your time. The next one says spend money to save time. This is a simple idea that sometimes we will do things like drive all the way across town to save 3 cents on gas. Your time is more valuable than that 3 cents. Next, declutter and organize. This involves sort of looking at the things you have, look at the things you don't need, and just get rid of them. Next, live in the moment. Be fully present when you're doing something. Don't constantly be thinking about either what happened in the past or what you want to do in the future. Embrace every minute that you've got for what it is. And finally, learn to give thanks and to do nothing. Sometimes we have to create margin, we have to make space, and we just need to rest and be thankful for what we have rather than obsessing about what we don't. Okay, the next thing that I want to look at briefly is the idea of procrastination, and the only reason that we broke this out as a single topic among many important topics is procrastination is something that so many of us struggle with. And so if you look, there are a lot of different causes, and this slide lays out some of those causes. You can take a look at these on your own. These are also outlined along with some cures for these causes on pages 150 through 152 in your textbook. But if you look at just a couple of these things, we have things like fear of failing, no plan for completing tasks, not being interested in tasks, being distracted, waiting till you're in the right mood, and oftentimes for tasks that we don't engage in, we're never in the right mood, or expecting that you can do anything and that you don't need to plan ahead. And so those are all things that you need to push back against. And this is another one of those things where if you take a look at this slide and you know you're a procrastinator, identify what the real problem is and then address it. All right, one of the most important things you can do to manage time is just figure out some sort of a plan for organizing and prioritizing things. And you can make things really simple. You can use technology and apps to do this, or you can use this simple plan that's outlined on this slide. So in the morning, you can divide your daily tasks into 3 lists. Figure out what you must do versus what you need to do and you would like to do. Rank the items in each list, and that gives you a plan. Obviously, your must-do items are the things you should start on in the morning. I know that in the past I've had problems where sometimes I will start with things that aren't that important, that I think are easy. They take more time than I thought, and I make it to the end of the day, and my must-do items still aren't done at 4 o'clock, and I'm scrambling to try to get them done. So do your must-dos first. Okay, so that's sort of a brief overview of the time portion of this unit. And the last thing I want to talk about then is the stress portion. So in terms of thinking about stress, the basic definition of stress is the mental and physical toll on your body as a result of everyday life. And one thing that I want to emphasize from this chapter is that stress is inevitable. I used to teach communication studies, and one of the things that I would teach would be conflict. And the first thing that I would always tell students about conflict is that conflict is inevitable. You can't go through life without having conflict with other people. And stress is the same way. You cannot go through life without experiencing some form of stress. And you probably experience it at some level on a daily basis. But it's important to note that there are 2 different types of stress. Eustress is good stress. It's the kind of stress that can motivate you. And distress is bad stress. It's the kind of stress that gets out of hand, that can actually be debilitating. So if we take bad stress and just focus on that, if you're trying to assess whether you're experiencing bad stress or not, here's some things to look at. First of all, there's physical symptoms such as anxiousness and nervousness, insomnia, memory problems, exhaustion, muscle pain, stomach problems, or decreased coping ability. So if you see those, it could be that you're dealing with stress. And there's an assessment in your book that actually can help you identify whether you're experiencing stress or not. The last thing related to stress that I want to highlight is that there are different types of major stressors. And on pages 159 through 160 of your textbook, you'll see each of these types discussed, and you'll see some suggestions for coping with them. So there are situational stressors that are tied to events, psychological stressors that are tied to your internal mental state, and biological stressors that are tied to physical things. And like I said, if you look at 159 through 160, there are some tips there for dealing with different stressors within each of those categories. Okay, so to conclude, if you look at what we talked about today, some basic chapter keys, some sort of keys for next steps for you. First of all, make space for true free time. Create margin in your life, set boundaries. Make sure that you actually have space to enjoy life, have fun, space for beauty, time for your family, and things like that. Second thing, work when you are working and play when you are playing. This isn't something that was explicitly discussed in the chapter, but it's something that I think kind of sums up several of these different sections. So when you actually say that you're working, focus on working. And when you're not, don't. Focus on playing. Live in the moment. Don't procrastinate. reduce your distractions, prioritize and plan your time. Third, cultivate self-discipline. We talked about how important that is to achieving your goals. Fourth, learn to say no. And fifth, identify and reduce stress. Time management and stress management are so important for your physical and mental well-being and also for your success in your education.